the Transnet CEO Portia Derby will be leaving the state entity at the end of October. This is after 3 years. In fact, I think it's 2 years at the helm. Derby's resignation coming as frustrations mount from labour unions, including industry bodies, over the entity's decline. Derby is accused of failing to turn the financial and operational fortunes of the entity. Joining me now for this discussion is the Democratic Alliance's Ghaleb Cachalia and also Cosatu's Matthew Parks. Gentlemen, to both of you, thank you very much for your time. Let's begin with you, Mr. Cachalia, if we can. The departure, or should we say the resignation of Portia Derby alongside the CFO at Transnet, is that good news for the entity, or does it spell the worst that's to come?
Well, I don't know if there's any good news in the entity, but what has happened, I think, was necessary. We certainly called for it. From the 12th of January onwards, we supported the Mineral Council of South Africa's call to fire Derby, and we continued calling with that until very recently when we put our 5-point plan together, saying it was again time for her to go. And, but the point is that it's not about Derby. It's about the fact that that the minister in charge, who's responsible for this, keeps putting people, cadres, who he has groomed in places where they are doomed to fail. And fail they have. We now have acting ministers, acting CEOs in SAA, in Eskom, in Transnet, in the Nel Dynamics, all in trouble, despite what Mr. Gordon says when he says in the past there were green shoots here. There are no green shoots here, there are only weeds. And we're getting rid of weeds now. It's a bit late, because this is not a crisis, this is a catastrophe.
Mr. Parks, should the ANC, and when I say the ANC government, I'm talking about the governing alliance, which you as Cosatu are a part of, do you take responsibility for exactly what Mr. Cachalia says has been the problem?
Hi, good morning. Look, we agree. Government must take responsibility. I mean, these are SOEs. We have been raising many of the concerns for quite a few times as trade unions, including when they offered early retirement and voluntary severance packages. But some of these things don't make sense. We do welcome the resignation of the CEO and the CFO. We hope that will cascade as well to Transnet Freight Rail, which is really at the heart of the crisis. We hope government will move with significant speed to fill those positions, not just on the acting, which they've done, but permanently. We don't want to repeat the Eskom scenario where you sit for almost a year without a permanent CEO. But look, you can bring the best CEO in place, but if you don't give them the necessary support in terms of finance, giving support around dealing with wasteful expenditure, in terms of law enforcement, dealing with the issues of corruption, of vandalism, of cable theft, of real criminal syndicates, then even the best CEO in the world won't make a difference. So we really need a massive concerted effort, similar to what government has been able to do at Eskom, which has begun to kind of show some green shoots. But I think the point is probably that we just can't afford to continue as is. Transnet is in a deep crisis. It transports less goods today than it did in 1994. And the consequence is that the state is now bleeding because of revenue shortfalls. And that's having a huge impact on the ability of the state to deliver public services. Yeah. There's a potential job bloodbath of 35,000 mining sector. So we have to move quickly.
Yeah. And I suspect, Mr. Parks, before I go back to Mr. Cachalia, I suspect that is part of the reason why you have put pressure for Ms. Derby to leave. But before that happened, Mr. Parks, did you think that she was the right person in the job? Because now that she's leaving, it's well and good for people like yourself to say, good riddance, but why was she there in the first place if she wasn't a competent individual? As you point out, she got in there and started firing competent people that are now having to be brought back into Transnet.
Yeah. So look, I mean, we're not able to kind of go through what happened in the interview process because obviously as a trade union, we're not part of those things. But we wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. We want to do that with all the management and hope they can do the job right. Her CV, is an impressive CV. It's not as if she just walked in from the street and had no experience in running SOEs and so forth. But I think the point is that she might be a very good person, but just on the point is right now, Transnet, she and her team are not having the impact that is desired, and hence there's a need to go. It's not an unusual thing. Accountability is critical. So, for example, today you found at Pick n Pay, the CEO has left because it's not delivering the results they wanted. Similarly, we must have the same level of accountability in the state. Transnet, at whatever level you look at it, is not delivering what it needs to deliver, and hence there's a need for a change of leadership. But not just that, the state has to give support to Transnet because it is not the CEO who's stealing cable theft every single day. It's not the individual person at top who's may be involved in corruption at the lower level. So we need to have a comprehensive package of support if we're going to get Transnet moving. And the simple thing is we don't have the luxury of allowing Transnet to fail. It's too critical, it's too big, and the impact on the economy is so great, and the state as well, that if we don't fix it, it's going to have a real cost to the society.
Mr. Cachalia, let's come back to you. Matthew Parks says time is of the essence here. Within Transnet, there is a division called Transnet Freight Rail, and there is a leader there, Cesar Mzimela, and yes, there is speculation about whether or not she's going to remain. Do you think that she's up to the task?
Look, I think Cesar Mzimela should go immediately, and I listened to Pravin Gordon on the radio this morning, and it seems as if she will go as well. So there are massive cuts happening. Now, he has put Michelle Phillips in as acting CEO. I hope Michelle Phillips is able to perform as an acting CEO, and I'll give her all the space she needs within a short space of time to do what is necessary. But we must also remember that Michelle Phillips was general manager from 2017 to 2020 for customer growth and freight solutions at this very entity that you're talking about, this business division. Now, and that's when the decline began to happen. So, we have an acting CEO who will see what happens and how she delivers, but we can't be just, hobbling from place to place, playing musical chairs and hoping that we'll get somewhere. We've called for a parliamentary urgent inquiry into the crisis, into the catastrophe that Roger Baxter has called it at Transnet. Transnet is not some Mickey Mouse puzzle shop. Transnet and Eskom are, as I've said many times, the heart and the spine of our economy. And we are singularly messing it up with appointments, with policies, with cadre deployment, and with peripheral issues, theft and all kinds of other issues on the side.
Yeah.
It is an unholy mess, and the minister is responsible. He's been there for a long time, and under his aegis, it has been an unholy mess, as I've said. It's time for him to go.
Mr. Parks, I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond to what Mr. Cachalia has just said. He's calling for Pravin Gordon's head. But before we get there, here's a question preceding that. You said time is of the essence. Do you think Cesar Mzimela is well placed there, or is she among the people that need to exit quickly so that a reconfiguration of the entire Transnet starts in earnest?
Yeah. No, we think there is a need for overhaul of Transnet management at Transnet itself, at Freight Rail, which what you're referring to, at the ports too, because clearly they are in free fall and they've gotten worse over the last couple of years. And there's just something we can't afford to contain as a society. So we need to move with speed, not only to have acting appointments, but to have fast-tracked appointment of permanent leadership. We don't want a repeat of Eskom scenario. But again, we have to give a package of support to Transnet. From the issue of corruption, wasteful expenditure, the issue of security, the vandalism, the arson, the cable theft, etc. Otherwise, we're going to be back in this crisis again in 6 months' time and again in a year's time.
Can I quickly interject? Can I quickly interject, Matthew Parks? I'm sorry to do this. So, Cesar Mzimela, what you are saying is that she needs to go. If there is resistance on her part, and she is ultimately pushed out, should government give her a golden handshake in the process? Because that's probably what she's going to fight and say.
No, we don't think so. We think if you fail to deliver, you shouldn't be given a reward for failing to deliver, especially when there's a huge consequence to thousands of workers. Right now, two mining companies have already issued Section 189 notices to retrench. There's a potential of 35,000 job losses in the mining industry. Why should we reward people who already paid a huge salary at the top of Transnet for failing to deliver and to turning things around? So we don't think that'll be a right thing to do. It might be there in terms of the contractual obligations of the shareholder, but we don't think it's a correct thing to do. Or when workers are dismissed, they don't get these luxury handshakes. And right now, workers are going to pay the price of the failure of the management of Transnet to do what they were paid to do.
So let's get to the question around Minister Pravin Gordon. Ghaleb Cachalia says you have a number of acting CEOs at the various SOEs. Has he done a good job of managing these, or is he part of the problem?
Look, it's a complex thing, and we understand, Mr. Cachalia is representing an opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, so they would always want to score political points. I think our focus across part is about what can be done practically to fix this mess, and it is a mess. And he's right to say that government must take responsibility, which obviously in this case means the ANC, for the mess of SOEs under his watch. We have begun to see some progress, for example, at Eskom. I think we've seen the reduced load shedding. We've seen the Cachalia now coming back on board on Saturday. 2 more units will come back in October, hopefully a fourth one by December. We appreciate the ANC is a contested terrain. There are people there who should be in prison, and there are people there who are doing the best job that they can, like Minister Gordon, under very difficult circumstances. But we're not depending upon a friendship here. We've been raising our issues consistently as Cosatu, publicly and privately, with government, with the president. Where they do well, we could cheer them on. Where they fail, we give them a thorough hiding. But I think the point is we have to move with speed. And it's not just about any political party, it's about society. We all need Transnet to work. We all need Eskom to work. We don't have the luxury of time. They have to move with speed. We appreciate some work has been done. It's not enough, given the circumstances that are bleeding.
Matthew
we're
Parks?
still continuing to see them.
Matthew Parks, it sounds, and you will forgive me for thinking this way, but perhaps correct me as well. It sounds as though you're saying that Minister Pravin Gordon, he needs to be cut some slack. And yet, there are accusations that suggest that he is interfering in the work of the boards. And so, is he not part of the problem? Why are you cutting him some slack?
Yeah. Look, we know it's always a difficult balance between the responsibility of the shareholder and the responsibility of the management. You don't want a situation where the shareholder micromanages, interferes, and sure. But at the same time, we are alarmed when we see the management, which is appointed at these SOEs, not doing what they need to do. And there's a consequence to society, to the state, etc. So that is, as we think the minister is right to intervene, because some of the sloppiness, the mess at Transnet, for example, is inexcusable. The fact that they didn't procure batteries for the locomotives timelessly, they don't know when are they arriving, etc. They didn't make a plan B. That's a crisis, and there's not just the impact upon Transnet, as if it's some incidental company. There's an impact upon mining, manufacturing, agriculture, the state, society, etc. So the minister is correct. When people fail to do the job of the SOEs, they need to intervene. It's unfortunate. You would not want that in a normal scenario, but the sad reality is that we're not in a normal country in a normal time.
Mr. Cachalia, do you take that? Do you accept that kind of explanation when there are serious accusations that Minister Pravin Gordon is interfering, for example, in the process of appointing an Eskom CEO?
Look, Mr. Pravin Gordon's fallback game is interference. That is what he has done. He's the minister of interference and micromanaging. And it has led nowhere in particular. You know, Mr. Parks talks with respect about him receiving some traction in Eskom at the moment. The fact is in Eskom that they are driving those plants yet again so hard that they will break down in the future again, and then we'll be in even more problems. The problem is that, and I don't want to play politics here, but there is an election looming, and if you drive these plants so hard to keep the lights on, you might win some points, but it won't get you out of the tunnel in the long run. And this nettle has to be grasped. Mr. Gordon has failed singularly. And you take these appointments. I mean, we have Nkululeko Dlamini, who is the CFO, who oversees at Transnet 1 billion rand a day in interest payments. She goes, resigns, and where does she land? She lands up as CFO of Telkom. Well, God help Telkom, so I can say.
Ghaleb, Cachalia, let me thank you very much for your time. Matthew Parks, unfortunately we're out of time. I would have loved to give you a chance to respond, but these are very serious matters, even though we ought to laugh a little sometimes just to keep sane, I think. When we return...